In this video, I will be showcasing my Fatal Teleport build. A build involving teleporting around the map, one-shotting enemies. So how do we do this? First, we have to talk about Spectral Takedowns. You unlock Spectral Takedowns when you put in 5 points into Takedown skills. The skill reads, for 30 seconds after defeating an enemy with a weapon technique, you can perform a free Spectral Takedown by holding E to aim and F to execute. Now that I got a kill with a weapon technique, I can press E and you see the execute button shows up. The default is F, but I changed my keybinds. If I press it, I do a takedown on the enemy. This is different than a normal takedown because you can force this on the enemy without it being breached. This skill is very useful against shield enemies in the tower because it allows you to instant kill them without needing to breach them. Now that we know how Spectral Takedowns work, how am I chaining them one after another? To achieve this, we have to use dual blades. Inner focus, which is the northern technique for dual blades, is quite different from other weapons. It is a buff that allows all attacks to be counted as weapon techniques during the duration of the buff. This also includes takedowns. So whenever we get a Spectral Takedown kill in inner focus, we get a Spectral Takedown charge, creating an infinite loop that allows us to fly around the map one-hitting everything. For the Valorplate, I'm using Aegis Horn. I find myself doing more than enough damage, so I chose to go Aegis Horn for a little bit more tankiness. For the augments of this build, there are 4 very important ones that you don't really want to replace, and other optional ones that you can replace if you want to. The most important one in this build is Prismatic Globe. This gives up to plus 40% critical hit chance against full health enemies. Since we are always one-hitting everything, we pretty much always have this critical hit chance buff active, which is very huge for this build. The next most important one is Cosmic Dance. Gain the Blessing of Luck whenever you defeat an enemy with a takedown. This allows us to keep the Blessing of Luck up all the time, and again, maintain our critical hit chance. The next is Twilight Bloom. Mine is rolled pretty poorly, but it still gives a lot of damage for this build. Plus 80% weapon technique damage if at least 2 adjacent augments are red. The secondaries also can be rolled better since I'm using a dual blade, not longsword. But yeah, this alone gives us over 100% weapon technique damage. The next is Frostfire. 36% critical hit damage during Rampage. Since critical hit damage is very hard to come by in this game, this is very good. And you can also roll weapon technique damage on the secondary. And the last one, which is the least important one, is Carnage. This gives us critical hit damage. Even though I said critical hit damage is very hard to come by, but Carnage is a legendary, so the drain is 30, which is a lot, and this pretty much makes that you cannot use any other legendaries aside from Prismatic Globe, of course. So if you want more damage, use Carnage, but to be honest, you don't really have to use this. You have more than enough damage to one-shot everything up to probably 435 or 40 in the Ascended Tower. Now what you can replace Carnage with is 30. We don't hit weak points when we're doing when we're doing takedowns, but you still have to use Surety to proc weak points on bosses since we cannot take down a boss. So this is a very good single target damage boost. For the defensive augments, I go with The Lion's Pride that gives me overhealth when I defeat an enemy, and the Fortitude that allows my overhealth to not degenerate. The Lion's Pride is okay, but it's not amazing. 60 overhealth on kill is not a lot when I have 3000 health, but it's alright. You can replace it with whatever you want. And the Fortitude is really nice. If you aren't using, say, the Zoe's Embrace as your ring, Fortitude is a very good choice as a augment. As you can see, my power usage is only at 95 because when I get to 100, the augment page lags out. But for the last augment, you can go for either a Vitality augment or a Spirit augment. Spirit augments will give you more damage since it gives you Spirit, and the Spirit scales the weapon technique damage, which is also our takedown damage. And also, Spirit augments can roll takedown damage on it, so it helps a little bit. But if you want to get, say, more resistances, you can go with a Vitality augment. Now for the gear. The most important part of the build is obviously you have to use a dual blade. You don't have to use the Wanderer's Ambition, but this is the dual blades that will give you the most damage. The enemies deal 25% damage to you seems really scary, but since we're only doing takedowns and you're immune to damage during takedown, so this is just a free 47% damage buff for your takedown. For the secondaries, you want to prioritize critical hit chance, then critical hit damage, then weapon technique damage. This one is pretty much god roll for me for this build, so that is very nice. The other very important part of this build is the Illuminated Edge, Legendary Greatsword. This starts at Epic, so you have to enchant it up to Legendary. And the primary gives us Rampage whenever you hit an enemy with your Northern technique. When I'm playing this build, a lot of time I find that I can't consistently enter Rampage because whenever I get a bar of inner focus and I get a kill with my weapon technique, I pop my inner focus and I just take down the whole map. And since you're one-hitting everything, you can't really charge up Rampage. Next, for the charm. Lion's Talisman is very strong for this build. Whenever you perform a critical hit, gain weapon technique charge and weapon technique charge speed. This allows me to gain the inner focus and also the greatsword weapon technique very fast. For the amulet, I'm using Heartsong Amulet. I'm only using this because the secondary are rolled very well, but the primary is useless for me. If you have better amulets, you can choose to use things that like Amulet of the Betrayer that gives you more survivability. Or maybe even Sunsteel's Crest if you're using void damage like me and you have a little bit of curse chance to allow you to maybe practice on enemies, especially on bosses. Another okay option is Mark of the Duelist, which restores health whenever I perform a critical hit. For the rings, there are also several options. I'm using the Journeyman's Mark for the weapon technique damage, and also the Chromatic Circle for the void damage, since my weapon does void damage. But there are still other choices that you can go for. Zoe's Embrace, for example, to get more overhealth and your overhealth no longer degenerates, so you don't have to use the Vitality augment for that. And also you can go with the Dawn's Lord's Signet, which whenever you defeat an enemy with a takedown, the enemy explodes doing physical damage and inflicts bleed with plus 50% chance. The only problem with this ring is that it might not kill the enemies around it, so it will damage them, and when they're damaged, they are not full health, so the prismatic globe will not proc and you lose 40% crit chance, which is very bad. I don't want to use this on my build, but if you're trying to go for, say, a bleed takedown build, you can maybe try this out. Another interesting choice is the Sunrise ring. This is an epic ring that gives you 3% Archon Fury charge whenever you defeat an enemy with a takedown. If you're trying to build for Archon Fury with this build, you can use this ring to gain your Archon Fury very fast. For the life stones, I'm using the Archon Steer. This is probably the best life stone in the game, and I think most people know that, but you don't really have to use it. You can use other more defensive ones if you want. The banner, I'm using Mesa Spectral again for crit damage, but you don't have to use it. You can use other more defensive ones. Now for the skill tree, currently I have 71 skill points, but if you don't have that much, you can drop points from Archon Fury, because we don't use that. We don't really use that in your build. It's only a safety button for when you're maybe surrounded by mobs, or you're maybe fighting a boss and you don't want to get one shot. But you can drop points from Archon Fury. The other point you can drop is finesse if you don't like the evade slide. Lastly, I want to talk about how to initiate a fight with this build. First, charge up your Sundering Slam before the fight, and blind the enemies. Take out your greatsword, swing a few times to get the weapon technique charge, and kill an enemy with a weapon technique. Swap back to your dual blades, get your inner focus charge up, activate your inner focus, and just kill everyone with a takedown. Thanks for watching.